the great thinkers of the time figured out, well, you know what we got to do? We got to get these people to think of this land as their own. Okay, I know it's not, but they have to think that way. Well, you can't brainwash an adult to think that. They're too far gone. We got to get them as children. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to coerce them with this idea of basic education. We're going to make it perfunctory, however, and we're going to make it so that when they're on that battlefield and they have to fight, they stay because they believe it deep into their soul. And what are we going to call this program? We're going to call it school, right? So who were John Dewey? Who were the early the early innovators of American public education? Who are they inspired by? Well, they're inspired by the Prussians. So at the end of the day, this system, George Carlin's correct. It was about how do we build factory workers to not question management, right? And then how do we then create those same factory workers who are so miserable they can buy all the products we're building in that factory over and over and over again. Okay, and then also answer the call to stand up and fight for something that they have very little stake in.
Hello and welcome to the Building Men podcast. Building Men, become the strongest version of yourself mentally, spiritually, emotionally, and physically. Welcome back to the podcast, brother.
Thank you, my man. I'm feeling good.
So we have Adam Chin on the podcast today. We got introduced to Adam through Abracadabra, through the main man, Mark England. We had Mark on the podcast, had a deep conversation with him, and he said, dude, you need to connect with Adam. So in the deep dive with Adam, we found Mike Bledsoe through him as well. We got this whole journey going on with the Enlifted coaches here, but really excited to have an opportunity to talk to Adam Chin. So I wanted to welcome Adam Chin to the podcast. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you both for inviting me on.
Did a really deep dive. We had a quick conversation just via text message, voice notes, back and forth about getting to know each other a little bit, and you introduced John Taylor Gatto into my life, and you said he wrote this book called Weapons of Mass Instruction. I just did this deep dive into his world, and it blew my mind. He was verbalizing a lot of the things that I knew to be true around education and knew to be untrue about education. So I just wanted to thank you for opening my eyes. I don't know how I never came across this man before, so I just wanted to just express my gratitude to you for introducing me to this unbelievable resource.
Hey, man, that's what it's all about pollinating the world, pollinating minds with these wonderful figures that, I believe John Taylor Gatto is going to be seen as truly a genius that was ignored by, his peers at the time. He passed a few years ago.
Yep.
But I believe his peak is still to come.
Totally agree with that. And I think now is the time. What's happened during the last year plus of our collective lives during COVID-19 and the quarantine was that people really had to rediscover themselves and their thoughts around a million different topics. And I think education was one of them. I have 3 children of my own, Adam. They're 16, 13, and 11. And I saw the struggles that they had. And they're pretty well adapted, as far as socially, emotionally. But the struggles that they had kind of going into the shell and missing this connection. And I started to really look hard at the way education was working, and so this book really inspired me to dig even deeper into that. So I just wanted to express that to you. So tell me a little bit about how you got interested in that. I mean, I'll start there with like an education reform idea. How did you get interested in this idea around school and school and
Yes.
that weapons of mass instruction? Where did that come from?
I'll tie this into a nice little bow here. I'll do a little intro about me, and then I'll also tie it into how I got that stuff in one big intro here. So, I was one of these guys. I grew up in a situation in which there was a lot of chaos in my family as a young person, some divorce, step parents, that sort of thing. My father is Thai Chinese. My mom's from the United States. cultural oddities, that sort of thing, and mix. And this is back in the 80s. I'm in my mid 40s now, so
You
I'm
look
growing up
great.
in a
You look
time.
great. By the way, you look great for your mid 40s.
It,
From one
that's
mid 40 man to another, you look
I don't know
just
what the
I
hell
was
you
gonna
two are
say,
talking
man.
about. Yeah.
Thanks. I was gonna say for you, I was like, you have 3 kids? What? What's
yeah.
going on? You look like you're in your 20s.
We're just stroking each other's
Thank you.
egos to start the show. That's what we do here.
Right. Yeah. So thank you. So yeah, this chaos in my life. There was a lot of good lessons, a lot of good examples in my life as a young person. There's also a lot of bad examples. School was rough for me. I didn't move around often. I changed schools at 4 times. Yeah, 4 different times. Um, and I was always, because I was what they call a third culture kid, it's like you've got half of your culture and one culture, half another, or they say one culture at home, one culture abroad, and then you're a third culture because you're both. So 1 + 1 is the third. I had a way of looking at things that was a little unorthodox. Okay. And I've always been that way. And I would start to notice things about people, about adults, and about teachers, and about attitudes, about self destruction, about self sabotage. And I would also notice things when I would meet someone who was very positive and very proactive. And I met a guy like this in college, my last year of college, who was my roommate, who was a very positive guy, a very go-getter mentality guy. And I clocked that, I made a note of it. And then I was very fortunate to meet and then work for a guy named Jeffrey Gitomer, who is a very well-known sales and personal development author. I met him in 2001 and started working for him that year. And he front doors the message of sales, and he backdoors personal development and behavioral change. So with that relationship, I started to understand the power of attitude, of outlook. And he was a big fan of Jim Rohn, people like that. So I started understanding things from that perspective. And I started realizing in that position as well, working with Jeffrey, that all the things that I was going to really thrive at as an adult, I was going to learn with him, because he taught me how to be very comfortable in a business situation. He taught me how business works. He taught me how sales works. He taught me how attitude works and how resiliency works. When something happens to you, what do you do with it? And I would meet a lot of people just like that in his sphere of influence. And I started putting things together. And then one day, I discovered libertarianism. I'm sure you've had some libertarians on the show at some point. And once I got into the Austrian economics school and I started thinking about these things, the education component became very, very clear to me. And that's when I heard the story of the Prussian school system and why school as we know it was developed the way it is and why it stayed that way. And I went back and thought about all the things that I learned in school and all the things that I was subjected to, given the fact that we're talking 12 plus years of a young person's existence, 6-7 hours a day, depending on how you add it all up, sometimes more, for 12 years. What do I have to show for this? What could that be if we were to do it a little bit differently? And what is it really doing? What is it truly doing? Because you guys, I'm sure both of you had to do this in your adult lives, but I can say this definitively, I have dedicated a large chunk, quite possibly the largest chunk of my adult life, to unlearning things that I learned as a kid, both from my family, but certainly from the school system. And part of this is cultural as well, right? So unlearning these things that were really enforced in these, these learning institutions,
Yep.
and I'll put a underline under institutions. So I'll leave it there. You guys, respond to that.
Yeah, the dive that I did recently around schools. One thing that Adam, that I thought about was the standardization part of it. That was one thing that really it rubbed me the wrong way as I left public education. I also heard you and Mike discuss this in a couple different aspects and modalities. It was around, staying in a certain spot because that's what you were told to do, or that's what was expected of you. So I leave public education after almost 20 years. I could see my retirement. I just needed to kind of coast out another 10 years, 15 years. I'll get this great pension with full health benefits. So I was living a life where I was just kind of existing to get to this date and time that really was, it had no meaning to me, and I was just existing then. So I really started to understand and think about, why am I doing this in the first place? What was my motivation for continuing it? And I didn't really have a great reason. It was just because that's what I was supposed to do. And then I started to think, well, let me try to rationalize why I'm doing it. And it didn't make sense to me anymore, especially the whole standardization of what we were creating these cookie cutter kids. And I was basically tamped down with things that I believed in favor of us looking better, our school district looking better in comparison to a local school district. And it was this cognitive dissonance that I had to deal with. It didn't make sense to me anymore. So I took this leap of faith. It was kind of like ready, fire, aim almost, where looking back, it was the best decision I ever made. It scared the shit out of me so many different times. Now I've done this deep look into what schools were really built on and why they were built a certain way. And then it became, schools were basically teaching us to become, factory workers. George Carlin talks about it. Like, schools they were created in a way that they wanted us to be just good enough to work an assembly line to make shit for other people, pretty much. Right? That's what they were developing, where they were developing worker bees.
Well, it's worse than that. We'll get into it in a moment. I have to ask Anthony, though, as a physical fitness guy, what would happen if you standardized physical fitness protocols or optimizations around one type? And you said everyone has to measure physically to this one type of workout. What would happen?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't work, right? You wouldn't be able to do it. I mean, just being in the fitness industry, you would know that it's not a one size fits all. There's not one program for one person. There's not one diet for one person. It just wouldn't. You would have so many people failing and not meeting those metrics because of their body type and what they can and can't do and their ailments and what, how physically capable they are, and you tailor it to the person and the individual themselves, allowing them to be successful in that. You wouldn't just be able to have, this standardized, this is what it is, this is what we do. It just wouldn't work, right? You wouldn't, it would cause a lot of problems in that if that's what it was. They have that in certain areas and it's not beneficial for most kids, and it also causes a lot of anxiety too, and people don't want to do it and they don't want to participate in it because they're scared of not meeting those expectations.
I mean, we know that there's a tremendous amount of variety with physical fitness. We know that there are marathon runner builds. We know that there are power lifter builds. We know that there are basketball player builds and swimmers, and it's the variation is wide. And within those variations, there's there's a spectrum, right? And even the needs for those particular types can be vary, right? So we're saying that, by the way, the mind is uniform. The mind is uniform and can be measured by one standard across not only types of individuals, culturally, generationally. So I find this to be rather barbaric, as you start to dive deeper and deeper into this. Dennis, I wanted to ask you, have you heard the story about Napoleon and the Prussian origins of school before? Did you read that in the book?
I didn't. Well, they bring it up. I like I mentioned, I just started doing the deep dive into the book. I'm on chapter 8 right now, and I'm doing the audiobook version of it just because I like hearing the author's version of it. I like hearing the words from their mouth. So I haven't gotten into the Prussian portion of it as well, knowing that that's where it came from, though. It was developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s, right. And it was done to create a standardized version where they didn't want people to rise up against the system, pretty much.
Well, I will, spoiler alert, I'll tell it very quickly. The way that I have read it, and it's been described to me multiple times, is that in the early 1800s, you had this guy, Napoleon, right, who's doing something very interesting in Europe, right? He's an emperor, and he can essentially lose 10,000 men in a battle, okay? And then it doesn't matter because he can equip 10,000 more for the next battle. And this is unheard of because previous to this, you lose 10,000 men, that's your entire army. Well, why is that? Well, it's because these feudal lords who ruled most of Europe, a lot of these small countries, they would only train and give weapons to a select few, right? This is their army, the loyal army of this feudal kingdom. Napoleon figured out, hey, I'll just take every single peasant, every man, boy in my empire. I will give them a gun. They may suck at it, but they can fire it. And eventually, if I give enough of them a gun and a musket and they fire and they hit enough people, I will wear down my opponents and I will rule all of Europe. Okay. Well, the feudal lords started to get really worried. Say, well, we can't put guns in our peasants' hands. They're our slaves, essentially, right? Why would they ever? And they would. They started giving them guns, and they would go into battle, and the battle would turn. And as soon as the battle got tough, those peasants would run away. This isn't my land. What am I fighting for? This is my master's land, right? So the Prussians, who were the early Germans, had to figure out very early how to stop this because the Prussians, the Germans, were the rising power in Central Europe. So the great thinkers of the time figured out, well, you know what we got to do? We got to get these people to think of this land as their own. Okay, I know it's not, but they have to think that way. Well, you can't brainwash an adult to think that. They're too far gone. We got to get them as children. And what are we going to do? Well, we're going to coerce them with this idea of basic education. We're going to make it perfunctory, however, and we're going to make it so that when they're on that battlefield and they have to fight, they stay because they believe it deep into their soul. And what are we going to call this program? We're going to call it school, right? So who were John Dewey? Who were the early the early innovators of American public education? Who were they inspired by? Well, they were inspired by the Prussians. So at the end of the day, this system, George Carlin's correct. It was about how do we build factory workers to not question management, right? And then how do we then create those same factory workers who are so miserable they can buy all the products we're building in that factory over and over and over again. Okay, and then also answer the call to stand up and fight for something that they have very little stake in. And that may sound cynical to a lot of people, and yet you look around and you look at how this has been manipulated, not just in this country, in recent times, but also across the globe, and it's very effective. It's wildly effective, and it's even if it works in the aggregate for society, it's worth thinking about. It's worth questioning.
Not only that, the idea of the difference between schooling and education. They are not synonymous, and so many people think that they mean the same thing. They can't be further from the same thing.
That just blew my mind, by the way. I'm just letting you know. I'm sitting here with my mouth open as you're talking. I'm like, holy shit.
I got to catch the drool coming out of your mouth.
I know. Because that was my first time hearing that, and I'm like, what the fuck?
I listened to a podcast. The podcast host, his name is Chase Tuning. Coincidentally enough, we had him on yesterday. He does a podcast called Ever Forward. And he had on a gentleman named Matthew Pates. And during that interview, he talks a lot about trauma. And it's something that I believe has such a pervasive impact in. And I know you do a lot of this with, the Enlifted Program. How trauma manifests itself physiologically in us as adults, stuff that we have dealt with, as between 0 and 18 years old, those adverse childhood experiences that we may or may not encounter. But on that podcast, Matthew Pates talks about between the ages of 0 and 6 years old, that we establish over 60% of what we believe to be true as adults. 60% of our, how we recognize the world and how we show up in the world, most of that is happening before the age of 6, when we are 100% reliant on an adult to take care of our basic human needs. That goes right in line with why, it's to tamp, thought processes down and to keep people moving in a certain way in society. That's when you have to start it. So when do we start kindergarten? So kids are 5 years old when they're developing that idea of self, they're developing that idea of identity during those formative years as they're creating their identities and what they believe to be true around the world.
Absolutely. And, Gatto goes into this in his lectures and his books as well. Because, well, you and I we've skirted around the issue here thus far in terms of what is the danger of this. Because some people may be saying, well, hey, it's better than working on a farm and being a dumb, hick the rest of your life and having no education and being unable to put together a sentence properly or do basic math equations. Although I would argue that that's currently an issue already with our current school system. The issue is essentially a monoculture of thought. I mean, you're creating generation upon generation of this indoctrination because you said schooling and education aren't the same thing, right? What happens when you stack 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 generations of people who are all taught and rewarded, okay, when the incentive structure is built around thinking in the exact same way? You cannot think for yourself. Again, John Taylor Gatto says it. I actually have a quote from him right here that says, "How have we been fooled into believing that experts and specialists are needed for matters within the reach of ordinary people? How have we been taught to think so little of ourselves?" This is a great question. Like the great innovators, the great disruptors in our society do not come from strict educational backgrounds. The Steve Jobses come from very out there practices, right? The Richard Bransons come from very out there, as Gatto puts it, free range, open source learning systems.
I have open source learning written on the board in front of me right now. That was one of the things that it hits home with me. Think about guys like Rockefeller, Carnegie, Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin. They were not, quote unquote scholars in a school setting. A lot of them dropped out of school before they even
most
got
of them
to high
got
school.
kicked out or something happened. They were going against the grain. It was like,
and meanwhile, we are having, this prescribed curriculum that is so antiquated. It's been pretty much unchanged for the last 100 years, and this is what we need our kids to be learning right now. It's total bullshit. It really is. We need to do what we can to turn it on its head, because we're conditioning kids that they need to listen to a bell, walk in line, and kind of stay in the order that old white men came up with this idea so many years ago. Think about that. I do a lot of work with theory around behaviors and how it impacts, and it's like Maslow and Gardner and all these guys. They're the groups that they were working with were young white men. That was pretty much it. So coming from a diverse background, I'm sure that was shit that you're going through school. Like, wait a second, this is not me. Especially if you're like, imagine an African American teenage girl. Wait, this was an old white guy that developed this program in 1918, and I should be following along with it. It's total bullshit.
And unfortunately, these power structures and this monocropping of intellect knows no racial bounds, unfortunately, because you look at, so my grandparents, they fled communist China for Thailand back in the 1950s, 40s and the 50s. And you look at the system that appeared there. Again, no old white men are in charge of that. You've got, unless you count Karl Marx, whose ideas that they were mimicking or quote unquote inspired by. We're talking 100 million people estimated killed in peacetime by Chairman Mao, the great leader. Okay, so you're thinking about, and speaking of China, this is a rising world power. Currently, they're in a lot of ways overtaking the United States currently, and they have one of the most rigid educational systems and systems of thought that exist currently in the world. They're totally monocropped when it comes to how to think, when to think it, what the acceptable worldview of thought is, right? So I want to be careful with this phrase, but it is a slave and master relationship between whoever is in power and whoever is going to be subject to that power. Again, it knows very little racial bounds. You see it in Africa. You've seen it in with Pol Pot in Cambodia, who literally killed anyone who wore glasses because they were intellectuals, right? So you've seen it up and down, Indonesia. It is a power play, And the problem with monocropping and monoculturing intellect is that, so look what's going on now. So the reason that America is still the home of a lot of innovation and has been over the past 100 years, I believe has very little to do with our school system. It's because of that libertarian, that liberty spirit, that freedom of thought, that maverick inclination that fueled the beginnings of this country, right? In the 19th century specifically. Okay, and there's a lot of issues with that. I get all that, but that impetus was still fueling innovation in the 20th century, right? But see, the Chinese were smart. They were like, well, we have to build a system that is closed thought. It's going to be very closed, very censorious, okay? But we got to get that innovation here because they'll just laugh us technologically. They'll laugh us with, in every other way. We'll just send our brightest minds over to the United States to get educated, and then we'll copy all of their ideas. So you're seeing a big issue over there now is that China is like the worst of the educational quote unquote system, the worst of the school system that humankind has ever created. Yet they're reaping all the benefits of a liberty-based system here in the United States by stealing and or importing our great ideas. So it's a dangerous time for free thinkers. It's a very dangerous time for us. And I say that somewhat alarmist. I also say that as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to stand up like you guys are doing now, like we're doing with Enlifted, stand up for free thought, for free range learning, for open source learning.
And there was this renaissance that happened so many years ago. I believe we're on a precipice of a renaissance. I believe that there are many people out there right now that are kind of challenging the status quo, especially in these things that have just been in place for so many years that we're starting to see some pushback. And I think one positive with what's gone on with COVID over the last year plus is that people have taken this deep look internally and said, okay, what can I do myself to change the status quo? And you are absolutely doing that. And I want to wrap it back around to that idea of school, the dive that I've done. And again, thank you for the recommendation. Gatto talks about a kid that he was in his 7th grade class. His name was Stanley. They called him Fat Stanley. I don't know if you heard the story about Fat Stanley.
No, I haven't heard that one.
It's so interesting. So Fat Stanley was a kid who would have flunked out of school. He would have been on, in a social worker's, inbox without a doubt. He was in Gatto's class. He came to school 3 times a month pretty much just to be there. Whenever he was there, he got into a fight. Some kid would make fun of his weight and he would punch the kid in the face. And so there was a lot of this going on. So finally, Gatto was like, Stanley, like, what the hell's going on? Why are you only here 3 days a month? And he said, listen, he said, I'm 13 years old. He said, by the time I'm 21, I need to own a business. He said, all my uncles and aunts have different businesses. He said, so I spend a day learning how to be a florist. I spend a day learning how to be a mechanic. And he learns all these different things. And he said, listen, teach. Tell me the books that I need to read and I'll read them. I'll do whatever I have to do to pass. But I'm learning more going and being with my uncles and aunts and my cousins and learning some skill than I'll ever learn in school here. So I'll play the game if you need me to play it. And from that moment, he said, I marked him present every single fucking day. And I told the other teachers, just follow along with me. He said, so it was totally illegal what I was doing. He said, but I learned more from this kid in that one conversation than I knew about schooling in all those other years of my professional career.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right? You get there is something at stake. You have to apply it, that knowledge, in order to avoid or achieve something. The motivation is there, right? It's clear as day versus a standardized test versus showing up and sitting in a desk. A lot of men specifically, I know your podcast, of course, is called Building Men, learn much better in that scenario rather than the theoretical sitting in a desk all day, looking at a chalkboard or a tablet or a computer.
And I could go into a deep dive, and you probably can jump in here too, just the way that boys and girls are educated right now. We're not meeting their needs. And in the school systems, the way that they're currently set up, I believe that like our job or the job of education is there are a couple just basic needs that we need to do our best to meet, and that's the need for autonomy, the need for competence, the need for relationship, the need for fun, and the need for safety. If we're doing that, it doesn't matter what the curriculum is. We need to help kids understand to be like an innovator. They need to be the author of their own educational journey, not a consumer of it. They need to be more of the trailblazer or the explorer on that journey. So if you had an opportunity right now and you were to say, I can rewrite what's going on in schools, what would a school look like, sound like, and feel like in your world? How would you kind of create a system that would meet those needs and not, create these factory workers for the future?
It would be open source. It would be choose your own adventure learning. There would be, okay, what freaked Mark out, and I told him this once, Mark England, you mentioned earlier, I said, hey man, those buses that they took us to school in, they're the exact same buses they take people to prison in. The same bus, they're just colored, they're just different paint. It's the same one. There's locks on the doors. You have to raise your hand to use the bathroom. Okay. This sounds like the Shawshank Redemption, like Morgan Freeman, right?
Yeah.
This is you're imprisoning children at the beginning. So let's contrast that with when I went back to Thailand when I was in my mid late 20s. I had earned a little bit of cash, and I wanted to take a year off, and I wanted to learn the language and the culture more of my family, both the Chinese part and the Thai part. So I went over and I found the nearest bookstore. I bought tons of Thai learning materials in terms of the language. I read history. I walked around. I started conversing with people. I spoke very little of this language when I got there. I knew 10, 15 words. And by the time that I was there for a couple of years, I was talking to people about their families, and I would go to shops, explore. Well, that's education, right? I mean, that's and there were a few people checking in with me to make sure I knew a certain number of words that day. I had to do it, right? That was my inclination. I was motivated to do it, and I was rewarded, and I was working with it in an applied way every single day. And I could talk very similarly about my understanding of videography, which is something I do, and marketing and running a business, and of course this Enlifted language system. Yeah. This is all self-education. No one assigned me the task of learning about John Taylor Gatto. I went out there and found out his material on my own. So to me, I believe that, to answer your question directly, is that there has got to be a way that we can create a society that's built around organic learning, because this locking people in a concrete box for 12 years until they do what we tell them to do, or they're punished, that is as barbaric as anything that you can look at in the past. I mean, that looks like Conan the Barbarian stuff to people. I hope it does. I hope it looks like Conan the Barbarian stuff to people 50 to 100 years from now. Because it should.
And well, I went off onto a tangent in my mind as you were talking. Once you said Thailand, I don't know if you listened to the episode when Mark England was on.
I knew you were gonna fucking.
He spent that year in Thailand, and I was like,
Head.
dude, do you remember that song from the '80s, "One Night in Bangkok"? And I actually had him singing the song on the episode. He sang a couple lines to "One Night in Bangkok," and then I
Makes
just
a hard man humble. Yeah.
Oh, it sure does.
His whole family fucking is so sick of that song, because every time he gets in the car with them, he pops it on, and he's like, "You know what it's time for?" They're like, "Fuck, Dad, come on."
Turn the page. And then I just wrote down from Meet the Parents, when you were talking about learning Thai. It's Thai. It would be Thai, right? So it was when Meet the Parents, when Dina's like, Jack can't talk Thai.
Yeah.
And Ben Stiller's like, Jack talked Thai very well.
Jack talked Thai real well.
Yeah.
So you learned how to talk Thai. Adam learned how to talk Thai.
I was just like Robert De Niro, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. And so now if we have an opportunity where it's this open source learning, and kids are more an explorer, they're going on a journey that they want to go on, and it's out of one, interest, and then two, their environment and necessity. If you're really interested in something, you're gonna fucking learn how to do it. If I'm interested in figuring out how to do a podcast, I'm gonna go to school and learn how to do it. If I have a guest on that's really interested in something, I'm going to go to school on that. Not because you're telling me I have to do it. It's a journey that I want to go on. So why not let people's aptitudes determine and their interests determine where they're headed? Not because it's in month 2 of their 8th grade social studies.
Yeah, they're in
curriculum.
6th grade, and someone
bullshit.
chooses, an advisor comes in and chooses what they're going to do for the next year and schedules out their classes. And I'll tell you what, the amount of combativeness that you're going to get from these students, when you push them into a direction they don't want to go. They're just resisting. There's so much resistance. And that's just going to cause for more struggles along the way. And that's why kids don't learn anything or do just the bare minimum to get by.
Or they're doing it to please their parents, to please the teacher, just to get
or to get to that next step, right? So it's like you go to elementary school, to get to middle school, to get to high school, to get to college, to, oh shit, I don't know what the fuck to do, and I'm in all this debt, and now I'm fucked, And it's like,
well, Anthony, it's. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I got so passionate about this topic. It's do what you are told to do, and you will be rewarded.
Yeah.
That is the underlying message. Do what you are told to do by quote unquote experts, the managerial class of this world, and you will be rewarded. Otherwise, you will be punished. You tell enough people that over a long enough period of time, and you will create a society of either A, managers who like that power trip, or B, followers who will do whatever it is that they're told to do. All right. And this is the danger, right? Because this is the monoculture that, just like monoculture crops ruins the soil, this is how you ruin the civilization, right? So there's a couple of quotes John Taylor Gatto talks about in one of his lectures, and one of them is, I got it right here, it is the term pedagogy. It derives from the profession of slaves. It's a Latin word. Derives from the profession of slaves who transmit orders directly from the master to other slaves. Okay, this is the managerial class, the experts. Trust the experts, they tell you all the time. Listen to the experts. How many times could the experts be wrong? It doesn't matter, because from the time that you are old enough to put a thought together, you are rewarded or punished depending on if you listen and repeat or you do your own thing, right? So for a lot of people, it's so baked into who they are. So when you see people on the internet saying, "Oh, these are just sheep," okay, fine. That's you could say that, but these are people who are scared, who have baked their lives with the ingredients of fear, and it's pretty damning. There's this other quote that he talks about the Dutch philosopher Spinoza, and he said that and this is going to directly inform and how I talk about Enlifted and what Mark and I are doing with language, okay? But he said that Spinoza figured out what was going on with the Prussian schooling system really early, or this concept of schooling really early. And he said that the goal was to turn the masses' dangerous instincts of rationality against them through perpetual confusion, so that they can no longer pose a danger to the elite. Elite. So think about this. So if you think about what's happening in a school, okay, even to this day, a lot of it's illogical, makes no sense. Like you watch the news, you read what's going on in the world, you go to a school system, it's nonsensical. None of it makes any sense rationally. There's mixed messages. Mixed messages are a feature, they're not a bug, right? Because what they want you to do is become so confused that you'll turn that anger inwardly. So you'll start to then first drive yourself insane, and then your fellow neighbors, then then everyone else, right? So this is a self-destructive time bomb that's been constructed, right? So what Mark and I have done is look at the language as it exists colloquially, how people speak it. Okay, if you look at the language and how it's built, you'll see confusion baked in. Okay, it's in how we build our day-to-day sentences, and most importantly, how we frame our self-talk. And our core concepts of turning what we call conflict language, which is a lot of everyday language, into architect language, constructive language, is to look at three primary what we call components, and that's soft talk, that is negations, and that is projection. Soft talk is when people use words like kinda, sorta, maybe, and what they do is they de-emphasize, they confuse and make things ambiguous. Okay, yeah, I kind of feel like I should, maybe start working out, right? What that's confusion. What do you really mean? You mean I should start working out, or I can't start working out. Negations, I don't want to feel this way anymore. Okay, well, what do you want to feel? Because if you're only focused on that, see, it's confusing the brain internally, because the brain can't see it. The brain can only see what it does, what you're saying, right? Confusion. And then finally, projections. She won't let me do this. Okay, well, so now she is in control.
Absolutely.
What can you let yourself do? So that whole relationship is about power. So you're removing your own power, giving it to someone else. So you teach people to use the language like this, and that helps further the agenda. And I'm not saying like agenda like conspiracy theories. I'm just saying it's an agenda to confuse perpetually how we view, frame, and map the world, and how we orient ourselves in it. So that was a bit of an impassioned, fiery diatribe there. Thanks for letting me go on that one.
Absolutely.
That was fucking great.
And talking to Mark, that was one of the most enlightening experiences that I had. And after that, I did a deep dive into Procabulary, into the Enlifted, the online course with Bledsoe and Billy, his alter ego. I can't wait to talk to him about Billy this afternoon. But it's so interesting around the language that we use, and then you start to take a step back and see yourself from a third person using those words, and you're like, oh my God, I'm in total victim mindset when I'm one, pushing blame onto another person for a decision that I made or how I'm feeling about something, and then two, that soft, ambiguous language, and it started to drive me crazy. I would go back and listen to old podcasts that I did, and I would use that language all the time, and it's nails on a chalkboard.
Cringeworthy, yeah.
It really, really is.
But that, I love what you were saying about how, confusing people in order to get obedience, because when you're confused and you use that language, you look to others to basically fill in the blanks, right? When you say I think or I don't know, you want someone else to then tell you what to do. So in the school system, it's like you're confusing the shit out of yourself, and you're like, you have no other option but to look for someone else to do this for you and to show you the way to go, and you completely omit free thinking whatsoever, and it's just obedience through fear, and you end up turning on yourself because you're like, oh my God, I don't know, and that's bad. And then, you look to someone else to fill in that.
Do you think that language that people are using, that soft talk, the negations, so is that something that we are just conditioned? Do we learn that from watching our parents, listening to in society, or is that we're born with it? And that our brain just works in a way that we're more in a passive mindset?
It's a great question. And it would be the kind of thing where you would have to do a tremendous amount of digging. To me, that is less interesting in terms of the origins of why it exists and who set it in motion. The more interesting point to me is, how do we stop it? How do we reprogram and rebuild the language so that it works in a way for human optimization? And that's what Mark and I are doing. I mean, so if you look at a lot of computer code, a lot of the computer sciences in linguistics, they overlap, right? There's a lot of logic and linguistics built into the theory of computer science, computer languages, and they're constantly refining these languages and rebuilding them and coming up with new ones that are more efficient. And you wonder why AI is going to overtake the human species. Well, they keep refining their language for the better. It seems to me that we're, on this path of devolving our language and making it more destructive rather than constructive. So good luck with us keeping up with AI if we keep doing that. So to me, it's how about we upgrade our language now? Forget about who did it and why it's going on. Practice it. Be a beacon and an inspiration to people to at the very least be conscious of it, and then figure out what to do with it. And one of the brilliant parts of Mark's being is that he's able to take things and make them very simple, because he's a very simple guy, admittedly. He's like, I want to make it simple. I want to make it so I can understand it and practice it. And if I can do it, anybody can do it. So that's what we've done with our system, and yeah, we've had a lot of success with it.
Absolutely. And going through that Procabulary course, it was definitely a game changer for
Yeah.
me. And being able to notice when you're going down that path, because inevitably, like it's not cold turkey. You start to find yourself slipping into it a little bit, kind of, sort of. Maybe I should, and you're like, wait a second, that is not how I speak anymore. Moving forward, that is not how I communicate with people. And so I ask, loved ones to call me out on my bullshit when they hear me talking in that very passive, soft way. So your program has certainly shifted my mindset in that direction. And just to slightly shift, but I'll bring it back to Enlifted, is the idea of giving like numerical assessments for things versus asking questions. And the reason why I love that program is because you're asking yourself questions. And one of the big problems that I have with education is the assigning of grades to for completion of a task, to assign a numeric grade or value, and that the system is based on that. It's based on you're getting an A, you're getting an 88, you're getting a 92. And I, as a principal in a very affluent area for several years, I had more arguments with parents around the difference between a 92 and a 98. And I said, it doesn't fucking mean anything. It's a total arbitrary number. And I would tell teachers all the time, it's not about the grade. It's not about, praising kids. It's about asking questions to make them go deeper in their own mind and learn more about it. That you want to inspire the learning. And another reason I got out of education is because I was like, ask more questions rather than give more answers. That's your job. If you're really into you want to be an educator, you should talk less and ask more. It should be less about what you have to say and so much more about what the kid is thinking. So what you're doing with Enlifted is you are causing people to ask those deep, dark questions of themselves and rethink how they're communicating in such a deep way. It's brilliant.
Well, and to add a little bit to the end of that, yes, the results do as you say in terms of they reveal very poignant and impactful traits and stories, as we call them, within. Yet the method is very simple. It's very practical. It's literally a simple word change or two. And this is what Mark and I call, we're in the how versus the why business. People say, hey, why do I keep feeling this way? I don't know. How do you keep feeling this way? Let's look at your thoughts. Let's look at how you're constructing them. Why do I keep doing the same behavior? I don't know. How do you keep doing the same behavior? Let's look at the mechanics of it. So because what happens is, this is that part of that confusion thing, Anthony and Dennis, I was talking about this concept of, you make this thing a black box. You make this thing a mystical black box that is impenetrable. What if you're running around the world with to use another metric, a 90 IQ? What if you're just a regular person? You have a mystified black box. Okay, well, good luck, right? What if I said it's actually mechanical? What if we said, hey, look, let's take some of the thoughts, look how they're constructed, reconstruct them with words, the same words you've always used. We're just going to reconstruct them, okay? And then you're going to reveal something. That's a lot more practical and a lot more applied than, say, sitting in a psychotherapist's chair for a decade, wondering why this is happening to you. And by the way, love the work that those modalities both have implemented, designed, and do. It's simply another way to get to where we want to go. It's a very simple way. And I want to use that word over and over again, simple, because so much of this is, like I said, made to be mystical and impenetrable. Let's make it simple. Let's make it mechanical. See what happens.
I'm interested, Adam, in your thoughts around the outside of the words and understanding that you are an expert in the actual words that we're using and how we're using those words and what they mean to us as individuals. Communication, there's a couple aspects of communication. It's the actual words, if you were to write them out, the verbal text that you would use. Then there's the paraverbal communication, the tone, the volume, and the cadence of the words that you're using. And then the nonverbal communication that's happening, what you're doing with your facial expressions, your body language, your posture. How much of communication in your area is outside of the words? When you think about the actual words that we're using, obviously, through the Procabulary Enlifted, it's about the words. How much of it is outside of the words? What you're doing when you say what you're saying, and then how you're saying what you're saying.
Isn't that really the realm of EQ and IQ? The idea that there's an emotional body and a physical or an intellectual body. So you're thinking of things intellectually. So the way I look at the stuff that we're handling is more of a broadcast receiver. You've got information that's being broadcast, information that's being received, interpretation. So I want to refine my broadcast, and then I want to refine my reception so that I get the right message out, and then I interpret the right message in. That's the intellectual component. What you're talking about is all the other stuff. You've seen me, I'm nodding, I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Well, I am engaged. I want to communicate the fact that I'm engaged.
Yes.
You guys are smiling and nodding. We want to do this, right? That's the emotional part. And if we were in the same room, you'd see even more of that, right? We pick up on that quote unquote vibe. Obviously, very important. And it's something that I believe they work in tandem. One of the things that Mark is really big into, of course I am as well, is the concept of breath and language. So you'll hear Mark talk about in the trainings and the workshops, you'll hear him say low and slow a lot. So a lot of people, what happens is say that there's a traumatic incident or there's something going on that's driving a lot of emotion. You could see that there's emotion in how they speak about it. What they'll do is they'll say, I was 12 years old. My dad walked out on me. Never saw him again. It's fine. They'll just very quickly run through it. And you could see something's going on there. Mark will have them tell the whole story. Deep breath in, deep exhale in between sentences. And if it gets real ornery, he will ask them to between words. And what that's going to do is that's going to engage the whole fight, flight, or freeze, go from sympathetic to parasympathetic, and start relaxing the speaker so that those thoughts literally have room to breathe. And what that's going to do is inform the emotional state. So again, it's our own method. We've seen a lot of success in it. That's how I see these two as intertwined, that there is an emotional portion of this, and it's dancing with the intellectual part at all times.
So to weave it into the conversation I heard you having with Mike Bledsoe, talking about the breath work part of it and how your brain impacts you in a more of a physiological way. You talk about cognitive fitness. So tell us a little bit about what that term means to you, cognitive fitness.
Oh man, I'm so glad you're asking this question today because I had a meeting with I'll say a very well-known fitness company yesterday, and we were talking about this and how this term can fit in what they're doing. So when Mike and Mark and I sat down, the motivation for building an Enlifted course specifically geared towards athletes and coaches, and at the beginning it was geared more towards fitness coaches, and now we've branched out. We have nutrition coaches, we've got life coaches and financial coaches, etc. The thinking was that, speaking of physical and intellectual, that we mapped out the different physical practices that were very popular in the world today. So let's look at, say, yoga. Okay, what's the mindset analog to yoga? Well, okay, we have meditation. We have mindfulness. That's an analog to yoga. Okay, well, what's the analog, say, to then physical therapy? Like traditional PT. Well, the analog is cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, that exists. Okay. What happens if I have an illness or acute injury, mental, psychological injury? Okay, what's the physical component to that? Well, we have allopathic medicine, we have orthopedics, we have the emergency room, right? So on and so forth. And I got to the point where I was down at functional fitness. There's a spectrum there, but let's say that's CrossFit 10 years ago, Spartan races. There's lots of stuff now. You've got kettlebells and mace work and club work, things like that. What's the mindset component to that? And the answer was there was none. And I was like, because think about it, the people who are doing that particular physical practice, they're literally optimizing. I want to get better, and I want to get flexible. I want to get durable. I want to get resilient. But I'm well now, and I want to get even better for the future. And that is what the Enlifted, the Enlifted method's all about. It's the cognitive fitness portion of that model. So it's the analog to functional fitness. So I want to work on how I see and map the world, and how my relationships are created, and how my ideas are communicated both externally and internally. And I want to do that all the time, because if I practice at that, I'm going to get good at it. And then when scenarios come up in my life in which I'm going to be required to be on and to have all my stuff together, or as my mentor Jeffrey Gitomer says, as the smoke is clearing, not when the smoke is clearing, like as the shit goes down, what are my tools, and have I done the work? And just like physically, the functional fitness people will be prepared, the cognitive fitness people will be prepared then as well. So that's how we arrived. In some ways, the cynical corporate look is looking at a product matrix and saying, oh, this is a part of the market that's being unsatisfied. It's been unoccupied, because we have all this touchy-feely stuff and this clinical stuff, but we have very little go get it. And you can say positive attitude, Tony Robbins stuff, but that's more like, I would consider that more like calisthenics or like Jack LaLanne, early stuff, early exercising, right? So that's how we see cognitive fitness.
And I look at it as you're looking at it in a very holistic way, where you're taking all of these things. It's not just the breath work. It's not just, the physical fitness part. It's also, you need to think about the words that you're using, talking to yourself as you're going through the process. As you're going through a physical fitness journey, there's probably a lot of negative self-talk that you're using. And I remember, like, you probably went through the same thing, like, let's fucking go, pussy. Deadlift, whatever, well, that's how we were coached basically growing up.
And what amazes me is a lot of times people use the physical fitness part, like let's say like CrossFit or just, Olympic lifting, whatever, fill in the blank, to fill in that void cognitively. So they think that it's going to be able to do that for them. But it's usually this, it saddens them that at the end of that, they might hit their goal or their weight or the number on the bar, and they still don't feel complete. They still don't feel like themselves because they didn't dive in to the mental part of it as well, because those, they help, right? But it's not synonymous. There's deeper feelings that can work, that can coincide with that, that kind of synchronize and link up.
And it can't be about the destination, because if it's solely about the destination, when you're 30 years old and all of a sudden when you're 45, 50 and you can't hit that same thing, now
what are you? Your identity's gone.
Your opinion of yourself, the language you're using to talk to yourself, you're not as good as you once were. But if it's about the journey, it's about doing that work and how you're talking to yourself, that's where then it could be a lifelong sustainable process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Resiliency and durability is right there. And like we said before, there's that physical and mindset analog. They have to be used together, because if you simply are performing cognitive fitness and you're in great shape cognitively, let's say, and you resist the physical component, you ignore it, well, your body's going to break down, and that's going to affect your mindset, etc. Same thing if you're, as we said, Billy, if you're using all those horrible phrases to motivate you through a workout or through a PR, and then you turn 45, and next thing you know, well, maybe you are that quote unquote pussy that you've been telling yourself that you are during these workouts. Oh, well, I'm different now, so I must suck. See, it's going to break. Eventually, one part is going to break. That's why they got to be used in unison.
So I'll use our initial discussion around schooling, the problems that are associated with schooling. We wove our way into the Enlifted program and the language that we're using to talk to ourselves, and then cognitive fitness. And I just want to bring it all together and thinking about coaching. Coaching, it could be coaching, coaches. It could be coaching athletes. It could be just coaching everyday Joe Schmo who needs assistance with something. How does that all work together? I think about my experience, one, as an athlete, being coached by so many different types of coaches that used a million different ways to motivate. I don't know if there was one way that really worked exactly for me. What I did as a coach to try to motivate and different strategies that I used. So how does that all work together when you're coaching a coach? You're trying to help people help other people. How does that all work together for you, Adam?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just like I said before with the broadcast and reception, part of Enlifted is how we communicate both externally with other people and ourselves. Part of it's how we listen to ourselves and other people. So as a coach, one of the things that the Enlifted system helps is in the assessment portion of working with new clients or working with even repeated clients who are dealing with something in their lives. You can hear what they're saying, even though they're saying something different. You can translate, as we call it, in real time. And so I believe that that's a really big role for coaches, is that they can become better listeners. As Mark says, we are all the right questions coaches and not all the right answers, all the right answer coaches. So you ask better questions, and then you can then interpret what those answers are that you get back. That's a big thing. That's a really big deal. Yeah, you can find new ways using better language to interpret how a person wants to succeed. Like, what do they really want? They may say that they want X. Once you interpret it, you realize what they really want. And this is something we've been telling people for the past 6 months, is that every coach, whether you're a fitness coach or a life coach or whatever type of coach you are, you're a mindset coach first. You may think that I'm a fitness coach first, but you're actually a mindset coach, because you got two clients. You got the client who's telling you what they want, and the client that's got the story back here that got them here to you. Yeah. So you better have tools for both your whatever you're going to implement in terms of your modality or whatever protocol you implement, but you got to also have the tools to deal with that mindset, that story process. And that's what we really like with the Enlifted work, is that it gives you a little, like an open window to what's going on inside. And yeah, so big fans of watching coaches perform that work with their clients.
And while you're doing a lot of work asking and Enlifted asking the how, when you're replacing the why with the how, you're also doing the work internally, helping people understand as coaching coaches, doing that deep work to get to the initial why, and why do you feel that way? Why do you feel that way? And like all of a sudden it works its way back. I know you do this as a coach. You need to like unclutter a lot of that shit if you're going to do the real work, and all of a sudden you're like, because my dad never told me that he loved me when I was right. a high school kid, and that can help you kind of shed a lot of that trauma, that you really look at it straight on.
Yeah, you keep diving in deeper, and then you link it to what initially was like, I want to lose 10 pounds, ends up being like, I want to feel more comfortable in my own skin and feel more confident. You get that emotion linked up to it, but it wasn't that original like number that this right. arbitrary thing that they wanted. It was something deeper, and once you could figure that out, then you have a bigger purpose behind why you're doing what you're doing.
That's brilliant, Anthony. I love hearing that. That's a textbook translation. Textbook. That's what it goes from 10 pounds to I want to feel more comfortable. I want to love myself a little bit more. And that may sound touchy-feely. That's what it is.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're excited. We'll both be part of the Level 1 Enlifted Coaches Certification Program coming up, where we've been in contact with Mark. So we are thrilled to be a part of that moving forward. I'm kind of downright giddy about that.
I know. I'm so jacked up. It's going to be great.
So Adam, tell the Building Men audience where they can find you, how they can get in touch with you. People are going to want to learn more about you and your journey.
Well, I'm social media. Let's say I'm on the outskirts. I'm out there in the wilderness. Sometimes I go on, sometimes I go away. The best way to reach me is to go to @EnliftedCoaches on Instagram, because we got a great community manager, Kimberly, who's just crushing it, man. She is a new member of our team, and we love her so much. She's doing a great job. So you can find out about Enlifted Coaches there. You can find out about Mark. I believe he keeps changing his Instagram handle. It's @MarkEngland205052 or something of that.
I think it's 57. The year he's going to retire. The year he's going to retire, 57.
Right. So you can find him there. And we have two main products. We've got Procabulary, which is for everybody. If you're using this with your family, if you're using this in a relationship, at work, that's a great course. It's it's usually $2.99. I'll hook you guys up, your listeners, with a code for $30 off. It'll be, how about we call it Building Men? Is that cool?
That's perfect.
That's beautiful.
You got it.
Okay. And I'll send you guys links where you can post that for your listeners. We also have the Enlifted Coaches certification for coaches, and you can, like I said, you can find us on Instagram at Enlifted Coaches, and you can find us on the internet at enlifted.me. I did want to leave you guys with a quote, another Gatto quote, if possible.
Bring it on.
Okay, so this is a short one, and well, there's two. How about, can I do two? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love this. Yeah.
Okay. All right, I'll go with one. I'll start with a dark one, and I'll end with a light one. Okay. So the dark one is, children learn what they live. You put kids in a class, and they will live out their lives in an invisible cage.
Deep.
Okay. This is the threat. Okay. That sums it up perfectly. That's from Dumbing Us Down, his first book. Here's the optimistic one. If we do this, if we accomplish this goal, all of us, right, we are going to, quote, find that genius is as cheap as the air we breathe. It is everywhere. We are all geniuses, and we are going to be able to tap every single child, every single person for the inner genius that they have. I've seen it. I've seen people just blossom. People you wouldn't expect ever to have genius. They switch it on, they become beautiful minds. So I believe that 100%. We can make genius as cheap as the air we breathe.
I'll tell you what, that's going to be the opening quote. This will be on YouTube. I think that last quote will be the intro to this episode on YouTube. Will be that quote that you just said right there. It's amazing, my man. Hey, listen, Building Men audience, you need to check out everything that Adam is doing. I can speak from my experience going through the Procabulary Course and going to be a student in the Enlifted Coaches Certification Program. It is all that it's cracked up to be. I cannot wait to go through that experience. Adam Chin, thank you so much, my man, for being on the Building Men podcast. You can find us on Instagram, building.men, buildingmencoach@gmail.com, Building Men on YouTube. Anthony, you got any final words for us, my man?
Adam, first of all, thank you so much. That was awesome. That was such a powerful conversation that we just had. That was exactly what I needed right now. Go one step further than you thought you could. Building Men.
We'll see you next time on Building Men.